Hi everyone, it's Kerry Thompson from the Mav Role CEO. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we'll gather today and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I also pay my respect to elders of all communities who may be online today. So good morning, I hope the conference is going really well. It's terrific to be here with you. My first slide will give you a bit of my background. For many of you will know me, but I'm the CEO of the Municipal Association of Victoria. And my slide, I don't know if my next slide's up. Could I have my next slide up, please? This just gives you some background. So I have been a CEO in councils for about 13 years. So I was in the CEO role, so very, very aware of the role that municipal building surveyors play in councils. And I just want to acknowledge how critical the role is for the community's safety. It's absolutely vital. And also it's even a more significant role in times of emergencies. And as we've seen more and more of those happening over the last decade. So it also gives councils incredible insight into the construction injuries, and your role is one that kind of picks the trends, the issues, the economic development in that area. So it's absolutely vital, your role, and I just want to acknowledge that. And it's not just from a legislative and regulatory responsibility, but it is that broader one in the community. So if I can move to the next slide, I really just want to talk about the MAV role, because I think this is really, really important, especially for municipal building surveyors and what we play in that role. So we do represent all the councils across Victoria. So we have 79 councils and members. And I want to make it clear, we're not just there for councillors, we're not just there for the COs, but we're there for the whole sector and what's in the best interest for the sector as collectively, whether that's influencing policy or advocacy work. And the other significant part is also the representation that local government plays for that community and that safety. We also insure all 79 Victorian councils. So we provide the public liability insurance and arrange for that. So we have a very, very active role in reducing premiums and making sure that if there's any trends of safety or issues coming up, that we absolutely work with the right profession and the right people about how do we actually reduce that risk and improve the whole work of the council in that area. So I mentioned already we advocate for councils across the state and very much in the regulatory place. So we think that's absolutely important, and we know there's always a tension between what we hear is removing red tape. We'll hear that language quite often from other levels of government, and the MAV is very clear that making sure legislation does make sense and it's resourced properly at the right level, boots on the ground, what's absolutely happening in that place. So we will push back on anti-regulation arguments. We're not saying you can't streamline processes, but we're absolutely saying that it's vital that you don't reduce them. And I don't think I need to tell you some of the outcomes when we see that. So we think that, you can have regulations balanced with and it will assist economic recovery, and removing regulations, we see the outcomes are very costly in the long run. So we're very clear on the role we play and we'll be quite vocal in that place. I think one of the really important arguments is that regulation doesn't hinder the industry, it facilitates it. And we make sure that what's being built in our built form lasts for a long time and protects our community. Nothing will send an industry into a tailspin quicker than a loss of confidence from their consumers. With some of the really high-profile cases of building faults in Victoria and abroad, that's a legitimate concern. Victorians probably still think there's a lot more protection in building control than there actually is. We want a building regulatory system that protects people and meets community expectation. That obviously benefits the public, but we also think it carries a lot of benefit for councils in the industry. We've often asked by our members, what can we do to improve local government's reputation? and we'll regularly engage with the media, both in response to requests and proactively work with media channels. We also constantly help to build the relationship between the state government and the councils. But we know there's so much to do, and we need to make sure we're finding a feedback loop to yourselves and your profession, and we do that through your association to make sure that we're there. We don't have all the resources for splashy campaigns, and they're not always the answer for how we work with government to improve resources and the regulation. So we find that it's actually about working with you, working with government about how do we absolutely improve practices across all areas. There's a lot of things councils are always unfairly going to get stuck with or stick with, and we know quite often that criticism, one, can be justified or it's absolutely totally unfair, and that's about the MAV stepping in and working behind the scenes, in the front, on education, whatever we can do in that area. Next slide, please. So what have we heard from you? What's challenging us? And I know that as we have a Q&A session and an opportunity, and if we don't get to the answers, we need to keep having dialogue with you about what it is. But what have we heard so far? There are things that we've heard as big concerns to building surveyors in local government. And I absolutely invite you, as I've already said, to let us know in the question time if I've missed any in that time. But when we're talking to you, we get the comment compared to planners, you don't have the same kind of prominence within council. And in some contexts, that's going to be a bit unavoidable. And that's probably because, as we know, for councillors getting elected, quite often it's on a planning campaign, like no more growth without infrastructure, no more high rise, it's spoiling, heritage areas, whatever it might be. So we haven't seen any sort of campaigns from councillors at the political level that are about building control as their main focus. And that has its good elements and its not so good elements about what the focus is on the building regulation component. But there are things we can do, and there's groups like the MAV and the VMBSG that can help you address and work in partnership. And I want to acknowledge the work that has been done. Of course, resourcing is always a really hard one. It's a really hard one for the MAV, being a membership council. It is for your peak body. And of course, we know very well for building surveyors, there's not enough resources. And you'd always say, gee, if we could double our resources, could we even get what we need to get done in that time? But our big focus on advocacy for the MAV is a better building control system. And we have to work with the state government and other stakeholders to get that in place. And we know there needs to be a dedicated funding stream that goes to building control in local councils. So again, a small shire trying to manage a really tiny budget with rate capping and trying to then fund building controls is really tough, but it needs to be done. So we absolutely know that fight for general revenue is a really difficult one, and rate capping has not helped that one and is not making that easier. So if I can move to the next slide about thinking about risk. So and just before I do this, I'll just recap what that last slide about. We are absolutely working on advocacy. We are absolutely working on the regulatory, and we're aware with MBS is sitting in councils. It's an absolute issue, and I'll come to thinking about risk and where you sit in the organisation, but it's absolutely vital about how do we ensure the focus is on what funding is needed to provide an appropriate, safe building system, building regulatory system. So I've got a slide up here about thinking risk. And I think this is really important because we've heard again from building surveyors, municipal building surveyors, that it is, and you do it every day. You think about the core of your roles within it is about risk. And you do need to take a risk-based approach and apply it to how you operate within councils too. And again, sometimes we've heard, oh, I don't get time with my CEO. I'm not sure if my CEO understands the role. I'm not sure if the council understands the role. It might be down to your manager or director. And I think the worst thing you can do as an enforcement officer is to find out there's a problem and that you're carrying that risk and you haven't been able to share it or get an understanding at the organisation level. And that risk doesn't lay with you alone. I know I'm absolutely aware of your statutory role, but how do you actually get it to be understood in the organisation and by council? And we've absolutely thought about how you have to have the power to fulfil that building survey, and not just in writing, in the Act. And that is taking steps to look at how do you absolutely think ahead about what might be the trends. How do you share that with your manager, your CEO, your council? And we know even if you had a building department, it was like you could resource it to the level, you will still need to prioritise. You'll still need to have a good rationale behind the way you've prioritised your work you have in place in front of you. And you may feel uncomfortable because your hands are tied on something important, whether it's due to resourcing or pressure from the organisation or council. You have to report up on that chain within your organisation. And we're really happy to work with building surveyors and CEOs on this one. You do not want to be carrying that solely on your own shoulders and have your CEO or council say, oh, gee, down the track, why didn't you tell us about that? And you raise that and, then you go, well, I had tried to mention it. So my next slide is really going to talk about what are some of the options that you could think about around that. Selling solutions sounds like, well, why should we in a regulatory area? But I think there's some areas that really could work in this area. And this is a focus on how do you get to the areas you need to in council. And I am again talking about CEO, senior management. I put councillors, but it's really about the council itself. The other one is your audit and risk committee. If you have an independent audit and risk chair and you have an appropriate audit and risk council at your election, they should on a yearly basis, at least a yearly, be seeking a report and wanting to meet and talk directly to the Municipal Building Surveyor about their role and what the crucial issues are for that council and for that community. So again, talking to senior management, justifying the resources in your area, just doing that. There should be a reporting process. As councils have more reporting, there should be absolutely a reporting, and you haven't got it, share among yourselves, whether it's a traffic light reporting or anything. Where's that going in your organisation? Is it landing on the executive table? How often? Because it's absolutely vital. And I think starting to say, well, what does an audit and risk committee do? Do they know what their most key risks are? And if they haven't got their regulatory services on that, then I think that there needs to be a conversation at that level. Of course, you've also, and I know you've heard this morning at a number of sessions about the role of the Minister and the VBA, and also the role that, again, MAV can do through this process, and that is through MAV Insurance, our own publications, working in partnership and letting us know if there's anything else we can do that. Court decisions are vital for learnings. We hope there is none, but I think we need to get those out, share those. Same as news stories when things go wrong. Now, we hope there isn't, but we know it happens. What we want to know is they go wrong once and they don't keep going wrong. So we need to absolutely have councils focus on what happened. Could that happen in their community, and what can we learn from it? And you need to be part of those discussions. So they were just some ideas, thinking about how you look at risk in a broader framework in your organisation. And also, through the peak body, COVID really probably slowed down the conversations we're having, but we're happy to gear up on those very much now, and also working closely with the VBA about the reform agenda that's in front of us. So I really want to go to a question and answer time, but I think there's a couple messages. MAV is there for the sector. So please never read that we're there for councillor, CEO, we're there. We manage the and run the insurance for public liability. So again, crucial because that covers all councils in this area. So again, absolutely vital that we keep talking to you about those and be engaged on what is the best way forward. So I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully you've got some questions to me.
Hi, Kerry. We do have some questions coming in, so I'll just ask them now. What is the MAV doing to lift the profile and increase resourcing in the building department and within councils?
Yeah, great question. So I'll answer a couple of those. So lifting the profile. So and that's why I kind of spent time on that slide. So a couple of things we've got planned for this year is that we run CEOs forums. They were very focused on the COVID last year, and they were running maybe only every 2-3 months, but we have hoping to run them more frequently. And our sense is that we want to run a whole session on building regulations, have the VBA come and present and run a forum. Now, we are going to absolutely pitch it at CEOs. We know we may get directors there. And of course, what we want to do is have the peak for municipal building surveyors there as well. So we think that is front of mind, and we think that's probably going to need to be a yearly event, because as we get new CEOs, if they haven't come out of local government, it just may not be line of sight for them. So we think that's an option. We also think it's an option, as I said, to keep working and advocating with government, working with the minister, working with what the role is for municipal building surveyors, and really having a conversation about the resourcing. Because as I said, and it's the same for many metro councils, but we've seen a freeze on our rate increases. So there's a rate cap, which means councils' roles, they've still got to do more and more in the regulatory space, and that's a good thing, but there's not a separate resource. So when a budget's done, it's the less glamorous things from, asset management to making sure your building department's properly resourced that may not get a look in as much. So that's why I'm also saying we should be encouraging CEOs and our sessions with mayors and councillors to make them very much aware that they're going to start asking hard questions. And that's why I thought the Audit and Risk Committee was also one where there's a focus on risk. And if you're a municipal building surveyor in charge of that area, as much as that paperwork it comes across your desk called the risk register, and it's really tedious and it's bureaucratic, you need to make sure there's something in there about the role of building surveyors and the regulations, because they are a risk for council if they're not resourced properly, and they are a significant risk for the community. So Sam, hopefully I've answered that, but I'm happy if there's some more questions around that want to, drill down.
There is a question that kind of leads into some of the stuff that you just mentioned. So it's not just about resourcing, but the salary structure needs to be revised and updated, increased to make it more appropriate for today's market. What are your thoughts in this regard?
Yeah. So Sam, and I'm sorry I haven't mentioned my slides. I knew I shorted for time. So I'll answer it in two ways. Two, we absolutely know there's a shortage. So there is absolutely a shortage of building surveyors and municipal building surveyors. So there's been conversations again with your peak body saying, but there's no new blood coming through. So many of the municipal building surveyors are ready to retire. They're working part-time. So I think there's two parts of that. Salary absolutely is a key issue. So this is where we can again work with the VBA about what are those. And this will then coming back supporting councils, especially smaller councils, about how they fund them and how they manage them. But I also think there's a whole lot of work about what I call the gateways into building surveying, who, as we know, I think we're down to one university institute that was actually doing the course. So we absolutely need, I know there's a promotion on getting females into this area of work, but again, I think it's got to be a couple prongs to approach this. Funding, absolutely a review of the salaries and what happens, but also for a career opportunity that young people find out about this, or people have gone into the building industry and going, well, I would like to have a gateway. So there's probably nothing better than someone that's been on the tools, been involved in the building industry, also having an option where they can take on this role because of their experience. So we're absolutely aware that there's a lot of work to be done on that. We've had those conversations with the VBA, we've had those conversations with the Minister, and we'll keep doing it.
Thanks, Kerry. With the proposed 6 options put forward yesterday, has Mav been given any idea if the options on having further tasks to be performed in local government levels increased, how we are meant to staff these requirements?
Okay, Sam. So so thanks for the question, and apologies because I didn't see all the options. I tried to get as much information today before today's, so I'm not aware of all the options, but so let me know if I've got my assumptions wrong from that question. But I imagine what's come through is a larger role for municipal building surveyors in the building regulation framework. And I think, well, there's no way that can happen without, again, a review of resourcing and determining what priorities are. So, and I already know that just from the building permit process and the checks and balances, I know, and I understand the private part of that, and then what I call the prevention work and the checking and safety, there's already a whole lot of tension. So again, I think this needs a lot of work about what that looks like in the day of a municipal building surveyor, let alone if you're in a major metropolitan area and there's 3 or 4 of you. How do you determine those priorities, and how's the council funded?
Thank you. How does a small council change the culture of the council when the senior management are not present in these discussions here today? MBS is only 1 day per week.
Yeah. So, and I don't know which council it is, but I just feel for whoever that is, that's exactly the issue. We know I've got small rural councils where they're sharing the MBS, they're part-time. As I said, you've got senior management either with so much pressure on them themselves for all those resources issues, or there's just not an awareness of the risk they're running. So that's where I think there's a couple of ways. I think one, we have to, as an MAV, together where we can, we might work with LG Pro, that's the local government sort of professional body. I think we use collaboration where we can. We need to absolutely make sure that we do everything to have CEOs and senior management understand the regulatory environment they're working in. You know, local government's one of the biggest regulatory environments, and building surveying and building is a significant part of it, but there's others. So we think there's an absolute lift on them understanding the regulatory environment they're working on, the importance and the significant issue of risk, you know. So I suppose what I'm saying, we would educate them, build their awareness, help them come up with solutions where we can advocate with government about how we get it better funded and how we manage the funding. And then I think the other part of it is we scare the hell out of them if they don't do it. And I don't mean that in a negative, but I think quite often you've got to go, well, here's the consequences if we don't get this right. And it's not just the statutory requirement of the building surveyors lined up. There will be an absolute questionnaire, and council, what did you do when you got asked about budget G? How did you manage this process? I absolutely understand there's probably not a CEO at this conference, so we need to find another way to get the message to them. And I could start, I mean, I think Emmeline's on board, who's a great policy person in MAB, and I want to just recognise the work Emmeline's doing. But I think we could start by doing a little article in the CEOs Connect that I send out to 79 CEOs and talk about today's conference and some of the crucial issues. I can't make them read it, but if it's out there, that would help.
Thanks, Kerry. I think we have time for one more question, but I do note that most of the questions are around the same topic. So basically, it's just, I'll read one more, but it does capture some of the others. Hi, Kerry. Having worked in local government in various senior positions, including MBS role, I have seen the importance of the MBS function within councils diminish significantly over time. In fact, many councils, including those within and close to the metropolitan area, have decided to not provide a building permit service and leaves it up to private sector to provide this service. What is the MAV doing about this issue to change the mindset of senior council members?
So same theme, and I know I've got a 2-minute sort of call. So really quickly, again, I think I talk about what we're doing, but I think because it's gone to a private building, I think that might have caused a bit of a blind spot not to understand that the Municipal Building Surveyor still has other significant roles. So we need to heighten that and talk about, even as a council, you've decided to privatise the building permit session, you absolutely have responsibility. So we need to get it out there. We need to work with the Minister and those CEOs. And I think I need to get some champion CEOs that absolutely get that. So everyone that doesn't, there's one that gets it. I think what we need to do is use them in a bit of a buddy session to point it out and get them talking to, whether it's at a regional level, talking to them. So I was very fortunate when I was at the City of Maribyrnong, it's a few jobs back. That was absolutely where I had a municipal building surveyor who had a strong personality. It was great. And he knew my door was open. He knew he could walk in and say, I need to talk about A, B, C, and it'd be dealt with. So it's absolutely getting some arrangements where there's an understanding of that, or getting it at the council level. So the council's actually requesting a briefing on a regular basis on where the key issues are and what the regulations are. I'm running out of time, Sam, but I think that's yes. I think
that's the gist. Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully everybody's had their questions answered. If not, feel free to put them in the live feed and we can take them offline and get something back to you shortly.
And that would be great. Please, feedback would be greatly appreciated, especially if you think we can do more than we are doing, in the sense of trying to lift the awareness. And thank you for being here. Thank you for this conference being run, and thank you for your time, and keep up the great work. You do a fabulous job under really difficult circumstances.